Apple has knocked Coca-Cola off the #1 position on the best global brands list. Joining me now is Jez Frampton from Interbrands. So, one of the things that you talked about with Apple is that they really focus on the customer, but Coca-Cola does that too. So what's the difference?
Well, one of the big difference, of course, is the sheer scale of earnings that Apple have, and that's one of the reasons why they've managed to overtake Coca-Cola this year. There's no question about the fact that both of them are expert marketers. You've got to remember as well that Google have sneaked in between the two as well, so they're now number 2. And I think there's, maybe some things that Apple need to learn from Coca-Cola, one of which is how to make sure that you stay near the top for over 100 years.
One thing that you brought up too is that Apple and Google have a real look towards the future. Google has Google Glass, self-driving cars. Apple,
and the loons, of course, the balloon loons. We can't forget them.
so you really give them a lot of credence for those forward-thinking outlooks. But how can Coca-Cola do that?
Well, Coca-Cola reinvent the way that they interact with their customers all the time. So they are just as innovative, but in different ways. The way that they use their properties around the Olympics, for instance, the World Cup, they've managed to create a tremendous connection with their customers, which is something that any brand has to do. So their real strength is that area. Every brand has to be able to innovate somewhere. If you're a tech brand, obviously being able to constantly push your product forward is essential to that. But one of the other things that Apple has done in terms of innovation is that they completely changed the face of retail, to the extent where everyone laughed when they saw the Apple stores to begin with. Now they've become a benchmark for good retail performance. And of course, what they've done with their people, with the Genius Bar, is they've effectively created a very, very strong barrier to entry.
When you bring up the idea of all this tech and versus Coca-Cola, is it a generational thing? Is it just that we're more open to these tech companies as opposed to maybe Coca-Cola, which is, it's a 100-year-old company. It's old school.
It's a 100-year-old company, and it's still number 3, and it was number 1 for 13 years in a row. I think being able to stay relevant to people, relevance is one of the things that we actually look at when we go through the process of valuing the brands. And being able to stay in a way where people still find you so compelling that every time you walk into a store, the chances are you're going to pick a Coca-Cola off of the shelf. That's an incredible thing to be able to do. In the same way that Apple have consistently reinvented themselves, so that only last week, there we are again, looking at those enormous lines outside their stores, everyone clamoring to get the latest product.
Microsoft, number 4, and definitely people would say, well, they're falling way behind, on the innovative scale. How did they stay at number 4?
They're actually number 5, and because you've got IBM in between the two, in between Coca-Cola and Microsoft. Microsoft have an enormously strong business, and they still have a very, very strong business-to-business relationship. When you look at what they're trying to do with their business, they are going through a transformation, not just in terms of the way that they do business, but the way that they present themselves as well. I think they've recognized that there's a tremendous amount of value locked up actually in the Microsoft brand, whereas a lot of us have relationships with Xbox, with Windows, and all of the others. There's a long way for them to go. I mean, the Nokia tie-up is an interesting one. I think a lot of people will be looking very carefully at that to see how they leverage that. It's very clear that they're going to be Microsoft branded phones. They've already had advertising out with the Nokia models with Microsoft written on it. So I don't think they're by any means laying down. They've got some very, very strong competitors, obviously people like Google, Facebook coming up around them as well. Very, very strong relationship brands in the technology space. But I don't think anyone should write off Microsoft.
Well, as you said, it's hard to stay on the list because BlackBerry not there anymore, right?
I know. It's very unfortunate, really. I still carry one myself. But they really did lose sight of their core market. And I think that really, if you look back, that was the problem all the time. They had an incredibly strong enterprise offer. Everyone literally had their servers inside their buildings. We were locked into them. And then they decided they were going to go after the consumer market. Maybe they should have just kept focused on the market they knew best. Great brands are very, very clear about who their customers are. I think they took their eye off the ball for a little while. The question is there any future in BlackBerry? Will they come back? They're certainly focusing back on that enterprise market. I wouldn't write them off too soon.
All right, well, as you said, 1 minute you're in, the next minute you're out. That's Jez Frampton from Interbrands. And I'm Deborah Borchardt with TheStreet.